Hi, my name is Jamie Tomey, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Evanston Bound Tour series, brought to you by Artist Book House. Each week we get to talk to some amazing book artists and writers, letterpress printers, and paper makers. It's such a good time. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Tomey, and I am so excited to welcome you to this week's Evanston Bound Tour. Joining us today is the writer Toya Wolfe, and I am so excited to have her with us because not only is she our tour for today, but she is also our verses and vignettes writer for this month of October, November. I'm still back in haunted house month for November. And if you haven't yet done so, go to our website, artists, plural, bookhouse.org, and you can subscribe to our newsletter there. And that will get you not only the monthly newsletter of Artist Book House awesomeness, but it will get you the Verses and Vignettes weekly serial, which features a curated writer and artist together each week. And then on our website, those verses and vignettes go up after the month is over. So I'm really, really excited to introduce Toya, our verses and vignettes writer for this month. So let me read the bio here and then we'll get to chatting. Toya Wolfe was born and raised in the now demolished Robert Taylor homes on Chicago's South Side. And I remember actually driving up and seeing them on the side. So I remember when they came down. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation around how you grew up in those homes. She earned an MFA in creative writing from Columbia College Chicago with a Dwight W. Follett Merit Award. Her stories have appeared in African Voices, Chicago Journal, Chicago Reader, Hairtrigger 27, and Warpland, a journal of Black literature and ideas. She is the recipient of the Zora Neale Hurston-Bessie Head Fiction Award. Phenomenal. I'm just going to add that to your bio here. The Union League Civic and Arts Foundation Short Story Competition and the Betty Shifflet John Schultz Short Story Award. She currently resides in Chicago, where she is at work on a short story collection. Landmarks is her debut novel. Welcome, 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 Toya Wolfe. I'm so happy to see you. It's so happy to see you virtually on this Zoom. I'm excited that you're here. So usually we start these tours with a very specific question. That's how'd you become a writer? How'd you become a book artist? How'd you become a screenwriter? But the question that I want to ask you is, did you always know that you were a storyteller?
I told stories all the time, but so did everyone in my community and everyone in my family. And so you don't necessarily think you're special or that you'll do that when you grow up. I actually thought I would be an attorney when I grew up.
Oh yeah, was that just like the job you had in your mind? I want to be an attorney?
I was always taller than everyone, and people would ask me like, are you going to be a model or a basketball player? And I would say, I'm going to be an attorney. And I didn't become any of those things, but
right.
We told stories at home. We retold stories and jokes about each other and things we saw in the community. And so I've always told stories, but I didn't realize that maybe there was some talent there until I started actually writing essays and things like that in elementary school.
Oh, that's so cool. So it sounds like your house growing up, your home growing up was very loving and full of joy and like you said, lots of stories and joking and hanging out. And I know that your mom is here, and I also know that your verses and vignettes centers around your grandmother in a way. So can you talk a little bit about how family, I know also in your slideshow we're going to go over this a little bit, but can you touch on how family has influenced your life?
Absolutely. I think There are some writers who are like, you know, they're Chicago writers or they're Black writers, and I feel like I'm all of those things, but a lot of it comes from just like being in a close-knit family,
Mm-hmm.
having a different relationship, like a really tight relationship with my mom, and a really tight relationship with my grandmother, and a really tight relationship with my sister, and all of those relationships being very unique and special. And then when I started writing, they were just they were all in my work. Like I couldn't get rid of them. But
yeah, they're right there. And it seems like that's very female. You mentioned your mom, your grandma, your sister. It's very feminine, female vibe, and sort of centering in that. I might be completely off base here. Is that correct as well?
No, it's right. I have an older brother, and you know, poor guy. He was surrounded by all of this feminine energy,
Right?
but still like held his own. Like my brother is like, he's a dude's dude, and like nothing was going to change that. But definitely, I have several. I had several aunts, and so there was a lot of like strong women around me,
Influencing your life, not only your life but your writing.
yes.
I love that. Okay, I just want to remind people that they can drop questions and comments into the chat as we're talking, and I will interrupt wildly on this conversation. But Toya, let's move to your slideshow, because I know you prepared something just gorgeous. And I really also have to say that on these Quarantours, we love to see old childhood pictures, and I know you got some for us.
And this is the blackmail photos it's real, and I did it to myself. But here we go.
Blackmail photos, I love it. Okay. All right, we can see this. Perfect.
All right. So I definitely, these pictures kind of speak to like the migration from the South, Black people moving from like Southern cities up to Chicago. And then we'll talk about the Robert Taylor homes and just like how I guess became a writer.
Yeah, so we have in the chat, I think it's Shifra said, I think I said your name right. I'm apologizing if I didn't. Quality content equals childhood photos. All right, so this is you. Look at those little pigtails.
I am in this photo because I won the spelling bee for my elementary school, and so they just took a little Polaroid. But this is around the same time I wanted to be in every competition. Like it was just fun. So spelling bee, science fair, essay competition, and around the same time, I won an essay competition answering the question, who is the person you admire the most? And it was about my mom, and I had to read the essay in front of the whole school. And because no one fell asleep or booed me, I was like, maybe you can write. So
I love that. I love that. And this is another, like if I had to write an essay and read it in front, and such a personal essay, maybe, did you start crying, or were you just so proud and excited?
I think my mom was crying, you know, mom.
Diane, were you crying? Just drop it into the chat. Say yes, you were crying, or no, you weren't.
She's not that. She's pretending to be invisible.
She's pretending to be invisible. Yeah, so tell us more about the competition thing. So was this all word-like competition, or was this every competition you could possibly be in?
I just think I really like to learn, and I was really active back home, like jumping double dutch and running around with friends. But in school, I don't know. I think it's more fun to learn by doing things, and so I was really interested in science and writing and things like that. And so there was a little bit of like a competitive spirit, but it was also just really fun.
Yeah. I love that. And I also absolutely love the way you're standing in this picture. You are so proud and excited, and just, it's fantastic. Do you remember what word you won the spelling bee with?
I don't remember, but I do remember this. Earlier, a few years earlier, I lost the spelling bee because I couldn't spell biscuit.
Oh no! I mean, that's a hard word to spell, especially if you were like in 3rd or 4th grade. Yeah.
My grandma's from the South. Like biscuits are a big deal, and I just,
I don't know how. Oh, you. I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay, so this was sort of the start of your writery bit where you won this essay contest and you realized your talent.
Yeah.
Okay, I love it.
I like to write. I'll talk later too about the books that most influenced me, but around this time, I started reading a lot and writing really bad poetry. So that was yeah. Let's see. So this is my grandmother, and she was born in 1926. So
wow.
moved to Chicago in 1944 when she was 18, and threatened her family for years. Like, the day I turned 18, I'm moving to Chicago. Her dad lived here. She didn't like her dad very much, but her dad lived here, and she just said, like, we don't have to be cool, but like, you set me up with an apartment. And so moved here, and then, you know, got married within a year to Percy Wolfe, and that's how I became a wolf.
That's because Percy Wolfe. Now, did she, where in the South did she come up from?
From Mississippi. So from Jackson, Mississippi.
Okay.
And moved to Chicago, lived on 43rd and State Street. And then eventually when she got married, moved to 50th and St. Lawrence, which is really just a few blocks east. And my mom actually told me that she could look down the street and see them building the Robert Taylor homes.
Oh, wow.
Never knew that, you know, they would move there. But I found this picture of like sort of an advertisement, you know, it's kind of like a now leasing sign.
Yeah.
And it had to be like early 60s, but she moved over in 1964 with all of her children. A pretty tumultuous time. She actually left her husband, and while he was at work, moved the entire apartment and all of her kids into the
Holy cow. Wow. How many kids?
4.
4 kids. Wow. And she left her husband at that time. It probably was a really, oh my gosh. Yeah.
So we just, and then we were there for sort of 3 generations. Like my mom and her sisters, and then my mom had her kids, and we lived there. And this is, so you were talking about seeing them from the highway. So this little road on the right side, that's the Dam Ryan. So you drive down the 9094 and see all of these buildings, and they would kind of fluctuate from red buildings, white buildings, red buildings, white buildings. And it was from, let's see, if you're coming from the south, from 54th Street all the way down to about 35th.
Yeah. And this is now, I believe I can't remember what's there now.
It's pretty, for miles, it's just like an empty land.
Empty.
And once you get to 35th Street, there's some other housing projects, and they've sort of restored them, and they are mixed income housing.
Yeah.
The space that occupied the Robert Taylor homes, it's just empty, which is, it's kind of haunting.
Yeah. Andrea saying that it's sparsely developed along that land now. That's what I was wondering. Because you know, they're not there. So you don't necessarily notice that they're missing, but you notice, I mean, if you did at first, but as you're driving along, it's kind of like a shadow, a ghost kind of. Which building was yours? Where in this picture did you guys live?
We lived at, I lived in 4950 South State Street, and Beasley Elementary School, which was like, oh, that was the smart school. Like, you had to have like incredible grades to get into Beasley. But right next door to Beasley is this huge tennis facility, Excess Tennis, I think is what it's called. So that's kind of a big marker. Right at 50th and State Street is where my elementary school, it's set there on the corner, and I lived right across the street from DuSable High School, which is like,
oh, yes, okay.
Landmark. Yeah.
I know, I don't know Beasley, but I know DuSable. Yes, okay, that makes sense to me now. Okay, so there's the Robert Taylor, and then this is in the complex itself.
Yeah, so this is not a real street. It's called the Fire Lane. And actually, I think they designed it so that if there were any fires, they could kind of zip through really fast. Typically had a lot of foot traffic. And I love this picture. It's from a newspaper, but I love this picture because it just sort of reminds me of like when you're small and you're walking in between these buildings. They are like 16 stories tall. And if you could see sort of like the there are these porches that aren't, the gate doesn't go all the way up to the top, but like that's sort of like every floor where people live, and you can
Yeah.
go outside and see people outside, and it just sort of feels like an outdoor indoor space.
Yeah. Everybody's hanging out.
Yeah.
And there's somebody dropped into the chat. These are great pics, and it's true. These are, I don't know where you found all of these, but they're just amazing pictures.
I will say I don't own these pics, but.
But and Shifra says, I'm feeling the serenade of Toya's story. I like that word, serenade. Okay, so, and these are images of them being torn down.
Yeah, on the left, this is sort of the demolition, and on the right is an idea of what it looked like when there was life there. Kids don't really realize that you're not living in such a great safe space. Like the playtime will go on, and so people would kick open the fire hydrant and like play in the water or ride their bikes up and down the porches, and so it very much reminds me of like my childhood and some of the things that we used to do. And then on the left side, this is sort of what's fascinating is that you would live your life watching a building like this come down for months, and just the eeriness of it. Like that sort of construction vehicle has a ball on it, and it would just sort of knock into the side, which is very Edgar Allan Poe now that I talk about it, but like just knock into the side until it was all gone. But like there are other housing projects like in St. Louis where they use dynamite. There's a famous scene in The Wire, the TV show The Wire, where they sort of watch them like blow up the building and then it's done and people kind of move on. But I just, to sort of watch these buildings come down a brick at a time, like there's something about that feels very, it's very disturbing. Like, cause it's coming for you, like your building will be next and you will have to.
Yeah, and that's your home, and you knew people who lived in that space that's coming down. And so it's that is disturbing, and there's a grief to it that you can literally watch. If that makes sense. I don't know how to say it.
It's true.
Yeah. Okay. Oh,
family. Let's see if I can move. Let's move us over here. So this is my mom. We are super close. My mom has an older son and a younger daughter, but for the longest time, I was the only girl. And so we just like, we were very close. Even now, my mom is actually visiting me and we just kind of hang out. So you'll see in my writing, I sort of pick a relationship at a time to explore. And it's because I really do take relationships seriously. And so yeah, my mom and I like are pretty close. My grandma and I, we have a really distinct relationship because she was my first teacher. So she taught at it was like a preschool near the Robert Taylor homes. And when I was about 2, I would just follow her to work. I guess she was the childcare also, but I learned to read pretty early, and she was my first teacher, and I just kind of remember all the special time with her, and now we still have a very like close relationship. So
I was going to ask if she's still around, and it looks you're the way you're talking, she still is.
Yeah, she recently had to leave home to live in like assisted living, which was like, it's heartbreaking because well into her 80s, she lived by herself and was very independent. So it was shocking for us, but at some point you have to realize that like once someone has lived for 9 decades and some change, like they may be tired and their body
they may be tired. Brianna is asking in the chat how old she is now.
She's 94. She turned 94 this summer.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, if she moved up here at the age of 18, moved her kid, she was a very determined woman.
Yeah. But later when I took on those qualities, she would ask me like why I can't sit still. Like, why do you want to live in California? Why are you travel so much? And it's like, remember?
Yeah. So Andrew's asking in the chat, do you feel that growing up in this neighborhood had an impact on who you are today? I'm going to actually shift that question and say, what was the impact? Because there had to be. And going through this conversation, I feel like you address that a little bit, but what impact on who you are today, and then as well as any impact on your profession too, so the writing and the teaching, both.
I think it's a few things. Like when you grow up around so many people, like thousands of people, it really
Yeah.
feels like you're living in a village. And I think later on when I would join like a mega church or even like pastor at a mega church and like just being so comfortable around like tons and tons of people, and being so used to being around people like me, like Black people who have a like shared history. I think as much as there was like crime and violence and things like that, you also had this sense of like what it means to have neighbors and what it means to be in community. I also think I didn't grow up around any doctors or people who traveled, and but my mom would take me downtown, like the way people would come to Chicago and go see all of the sites. Like I was downtown at museums and in Grant Park and doing all these things, even while like, you know, there was shooting back in my neighborhood. And so I think the biggest thing that growing up in this neighborhood taught me was that even though you don't see you don't see it, you can still dream it and hope that it exists. And so I think later going off to college and like being able to travel and things like that, I think having a mom who instilled in me like there's something else around the corner even if you don't see it, that was like the biggest thing I learned like growing up in a housing project.
Yeah, yeah. And the people who influenced you more than the place. While the place was important, the people were the number one, right? Is that what I'm getting from you?
And even in elementary school, I was growing up in the 80s, 80s and like through mid 90s, and the teachers were there because they wanted to be, not because someone was going to pay off their student loans. Like they chose to teach in a neighborhood that served kids from the projects.
Yeah.
And so I think when you have those kind of educators who are being super intentional about how they give back, and that they are encouraging you to go get everything that you want, and even things you don't think you want, like that's huge. Like my CPS experience was, I think it was incredible. Like, sure, our books were old and sure we didn't have so much funding, but you felt that love and you felt that sort of encouragement from everyone in the building.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to Curie High School. Shout out to all the Curie High School students on this call. But and Curie's far, but it was a art school. It was a magnet school. So you had to have you had to have the grades to enter a lottery. This feels like so much like chance.
Yeah.
And then I would take a bus at 6:50 in the morning all the way out to like Midway Airport and then get on a train and then you were at Curie. But it was totally worth it.
Totally worth it. Okay. So you and Grandma, they're gorgeous pictures here. She's short.
She is. She's only 5'5".
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people think about a housing project and they wonder like, you know, how do people raise families in spaces like this? But we celebrated Halloween and we celebrated graduations and we had birthday parties for everybody's birthday. And so I think somehow my mom managed to give us a childhood in a space where you know, you could pick up the Trib or the Sun-Times and read about terrible things happening in Robert Taylor any day of the week. But I think back and I also have these like really great memories.
Yeah. I wonder, like, some of your stories are about that juxtaposition of the violence in the childhood. I'm asking, I've only read a couple things by you. Yeah. So do you feel any responsibility to tell this story as opposed to just the story that we all hear about Robert Taylor and the violence and the drugs and the, prostitution and all of that? Do you feel a responsibility or an urge to tell this side of the story of family time and community and love?
And Jamie, it's not, it's so interesting. It's not such a sense of duty. It's just that when I think back, it is a mix, like there is balance. There are the really heavy things, but then there's also hope and joy. And when I read books or watch movies about kids growing up in the inner city, it's mostly telling you stories about little boys and how terrible their plight and how they have no future and no hope. And that like disturbs me so much because
it's not the full story.
It's not the full story.
It's not even a fraction. I mean, it's a fraction of the story, it seems.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I don't know. And to anyone who would argue like I'm leaning heavier on a more hopeful slant, I think we need to know that there is hope. Like that. That's all I can say.
That's all you can say. There is hope.
Yeah.
And I also wonder if, and this might be a little bit of an odd wondering thing, but I wonder if the stories that are being told, like you said in the movies, it's the young black man or the young boy and the plight and all of that, if that is the narrative that's being controlled in a certain way and for certain reasons, and that it is trying to find that shift and take care of telling the story as a full picture, because you teach a class that's own voices. Or can you tell me the name of your class again?
Yeah, it's called Your Story, Your Voice.
Your story, your voice. So it's important to tell all perspectives of a story. And I don't know what I'm trying to ask, and I'm not sure if you can help me figure out what I'm trying to ask, but I think it has to do with the narrow view of storytelling when it comes to Black people, and also people projects and inner city. And because of course we all know what the narrative of Chicago is that certain people are putting out, and that is not even close to it. I have people who will sometimes say, oh, be careful, I heard there was this stuff going on in Chicago. I was like, no, that's not going on in Chicago. Like, I know you're watching. Anyway.
I think what you're getting at is the reason that people are telling this sort of very slim narrative and their intentionality. I think what's important is that when we tell our own stories, they have some variety. And I also got sick of reading a ton of stories about the projects told by people who never lived in the projects, who never walked through the projects, who never had a friend who lived in these spaces. And that's definitely going to dictate how you tell a story and what you decide to focus on. And so even in this class, Your Story, Your Voice, like I encourage my students to talk about whatever they want. They stay within MLA formatting, but just like whatever, just keep your the things
you got those rules.
right, the things you're super excited about and the things that you want to share, like share that. And that's what's problematic when only certain voices are getting published and have novels, and like then you start to hear a very singular narrative that is intentional about telling a very specific story.
Yeah. So yes. So we have a bunch of things in the chat that I just want to mention. Patrick says, I saw the literary commitment and personal growth in LaToya when she interned with us at Third World Press.
Hey, Patrick.
This is a little shout out there for your gorgeousness.
Great.
And Brianna's asking, do you think people will ever see Chicago differently? And I think that's a really important question and a good question to ask. And so I'm going to read the next chats and we can kind of talk about that a little bit. But Melissa's saying, best cornerstone class ever, Your Story, Your Voice. And of course it's Toya. I was reading what Patrick had written. Is your full name LaToya, or is it just?
It's LaToya, but no one calls me that except, the doctor.
Except Patrick.
Patrick.
Toya was very, very humble. Yeah. So the comment, Toya was way humble to introducing herself before a class started. Awesome class. Okay, so do you think that the story of Chicago, I think, okay, the question, I'm going to read it exactly how Brianna put that.
I got it. I really want to address that. So Brianna, thank you so much for asking that question. And here's what I hate. So much of our Chicago stories are not told by Chicagoans.
Yeah.
So, I also think they have in their minds what happens here, and they want you to stick to the script. And I hope to really crack that open. I don't, and then you have to ask people which Chicago you're talking about, which side.
Yes.
There's a whole West Side that never gets talked about on TV. Like,
yeah.
it's just like Chicago is so big and wide and full of so many different communities. Chicago is not just African Americans, it's Black people from the Caribbean, from Africa, from everywhere. And so I just think, Brianna, to your question, I'm going to do my very best, but I'm only one person, but I'm going to call people out too, like about writing about our city in this very singular way when first of all, they may actually only engage with a certain population of Chicago and then call that Chicago.
Right. Or they're looking at it from the outside, as we've seen in certain circles, looking at it from the outside, thinking that it's a certain way, and it's not. And maybe not even being here and watching it. So your slide here, my ticket out of the hood, education. Talk to us.
Because you know what, like my grandma moved in the 60s, and then my mom was there. My mom had my brother, my sister, and I. And when I turned 18, I moved across town to North Park University and moved into the dorms. Now, it seems crazy for you to go across town and live on campus. It's a parent's worst nightmare. Like, why would you go so far and be yet so close and like, you know, stay home and go to school? But I was really excited about the whole experience of college. And so I like left, and this picture over on the left where I'm in front of the beach, it was the first time I'd ever traveled to Florida at like 19 for a mission trip. If there was any reason that I could travel, I was going to jump on it. So went to the Florida Keys in Miami. We were helping to rebuild a church, to paint church, but it was just great to just like travel for once. And then down here at the bottom, North Park University had this really cool, they were like ahead of their time. It's a racial reconciliation trip where they would pair Black students with white students. And we would take a bus ride down south and like visit all these towns that were like flying Confederate flags and just like incarcerating people for running stoplights. They'd be in jail for like 4 months waiting on a court date. Like it was crazy. But just to like go on that kind of trip and to have these experiences, and then to finally start, I was always an English major, but to finally start writing stories, writing really bad stories at first, but follow English. Like one of my old English professors, I think, is on this call. And I just remember sitting in his class, like hearing literature and just getting really excited about it. And then I started trying to write my own stuff. And years later, things started to make a little bit of sense. But and then eventually leaving Columbia and going over to, leaving North Park and going to Columbia College and studying creative writing and graduating from the Chicago Theater. Like, I have a better graduation venue than like.
I know, that's gorgeous. So in the chat, Hannah Joy Miller is saying, thank you for mentioning the love and support found within Chicago Public Schools. I can also relate to the experience of support from growing up in CPS schools. Yeah. Do you think that CPS has been overlooked by our city, especially with our former mayor who is against CPS schools?
Again, it's like we don't get a well-rounded story. Like I know some incredible CPS teachers who love their students, work really hard, don't have a lot of resources, but use what they have and like love their students. And this is a narrative you never hear. You don't hear it on TV. You don't hear it outside of Chicago. But again, like those of us who know this to be true, like we have to speak up and we have to support our educators who are working really hard and planting seeds so that we can go off and do like great things. And absolutely, Hannah, like it's true. Yeah.
So Maria is our resident. Every week we call on her because she's a librarian in Milwaukee. Yeah. And so if we ever have any library things or anything, we need a librarian to look up real fast during our coin tours. She's the one. And she says she got a great education at CPS. And Hannah Joy Miller also said, and I'm sorry, Hannah Joy Miller, I have to say all three of your names because it's such a great name.
It is.
My dad happens to be a CPS teacher. And then Brianna says, I believe I have had the best CPS experience at Kenwood and would not have done it differently. Yeah. So you graduated from Columbia with your MFA. What did you do then? Did your novel come out of that intensive MFA experience? Tell me.
The folks on this call who have read this novel several times since 2005 or so, like I've been working on this novel forever, and I finally think I'm like super close to being able to like pass it over to the folks who need it next. But I just think I took a draft into grad school, which is one of the best things you can do. I had some really great advice from a writer who said to me, don't go to grad school until you have something to work on. And so coming in the door with this, it was still a raggedy manuscript, but coming in the door with the manuscript, everything I learned, I could sort of apply it towards this thing that I was working on. So and then the people I met at that time, like I still call on them to read things. We still, hop on a Zoom and say like, man, why do we still torture ourselves this way? And then, talk about how you can't jump off the train now. But yeah, it was, that's where I did the best polishing. That's where I met Audrey Neffenegger, who taught a class called Big Books. It's a novel writing workshop, which is thing to think about. Like 12 people, you're going to read 11 other novels and talk about them and really like workshop a whole book. But incredible experience.
And then do you have another slide? I don't remember.
I do. Let's see. I tried to give you all the things. So let's talk
all
about
the things. Oh yes, we get to talk about what's inspired you. I am so excited because this is one of my favorite things, is finding out what inspires different artists and writers.
Jamie, I grew up reading the creepiest things. Edgar Allan Poe. I'm like 11 years old. I'm reading Edgar Allan Poe. I'm reading Stephen King. I remember Thinner was such an important book. And then,
it's so creepy.
I don't know. I was like really into horror as a small kid, which seems a little disturbing. But then I got to college my freshman year and fell in love with Black women writers. Like there was this professor at North Park who taught a class on Black women writers. And that's why I read Toni Morrison for the first time and The Color Purple. But I stumbled upon, at Columbia, I stumbled upon a book by a writer, Toni K. Bambara. Toni Morrison actually found her and was her editor. And she wrote these stories that reminded me of the people in Robert Taylor. So they're set in New York City, but like kids running around New York, being really sort of bossy and bold, but curious. And then in 1999, Sister Soldier wrote The Coldest Winter Ever. And let me tell you something, people swear that little Black kids don't read books. This book was widely circulated around like the Black community. And my sister, who's 6 years younger, when I was in college, she was in high school. And I came home for the holidays and she was reading this book. And then I read this book overnight. Like,
I love it.
And just thinking about what it means to be, like what kind of Black woman writer I wanted to be. Like I read a lot of Terry McMillan and really loved the cadence of the conversations in her writing. And it took me a while to like find my own unique voice as a Black woman writer, because I wasn't trying to be like anyone else, but I also had to figure out like who, like what my voice would be.
Yeah, and whose voices inspired you. So we got Stephen King and Sister Soldier. That's like two horror. Bluest. Oh, yeah.
I moved from there and just started reading like everything, because whether it's like structure or pacing or suspense, I think everybody has something to offer you. So
yeah. So do you find yourself reading as a reader? Are you able to read as a reader only still, where you're just so involved in the story itself and involved in the characters' lives, and Or do you find yourself, whenever you're reading anything, do you find yourself looking at those elements of the novel or the story, and the way it's put together, the way things are held together, and the process that you can literally see the process that the writer went through? Do you find yourself reading more as a reader or as a writer, or are you able to switch between the two depending on what where your brain is at one point? Like if you're reading just because you want to read structure. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I feel like I am primarily a reader and don't always pay attention to how things are put together, or structure of plot, or like character devices or whatever. So plot devices, anything like that. So do you find yourself more of a able to lose yourself in a book, or you come with that critical eye more often?
I think it depends. If I am reading, mostly I read as a writer, I just can't help it. But if I go into a book knowing it's terrible, but somebody told me the plot was really juicy, then I turn off all the switches.
Uh-huh.
Like, I did read the Twilight series. I did read.
Oh God, I read the Twilight series.
But I
read the Twilight series mostly to know what my students, as a teaching artist going into the public schools, into middle school particularly, what my students were reading and what they were getting out of it. And
yeah,
I was
Jamie,
like, ah!
Jamie, here's the thing. If you go into a book knowing that it's like probably not written well, I am able to just enjoy the plot. Like I'm not, but then that's like it's super intentional. It's like you take this book on vacation, but most of it now, I can't turn off like my writer's hat because I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to honor like really the great writing skills. But yeah, and it's interesting. Like I think once you start reading as a writer, it is a little bit of a it's like something's lost because you can't just enjoy a book. You want to like pick it apart, and I don't know, maybe it's for the best. Like
Are you finding that now as you watch a movie, since I don't know if everybody in the group knows this, but you're adapting your story for the screen, and so do you find that you're watching movies with more of that filmmaker screenwriter eye?
Oh, certainly.
At this point, yeah.
For TV and film, I can't turn it off at all. But it's exciting though. It's not like it doesn't feel like work. I catch everything. Like with camera angles, when dialogue is really bad, when a show has a specific tone. So I just think it's really exciting and interesting to watch TV like that. Like, why are we, I was really into Game of Thrones. Like, why am I so into Game of Thrones? Like, there are no Black people on the show. Like, I didn't grow up like this. Like, why do you care? When a show can capture you in that way, and it's so different from your world, like, I want to know why. And then I want to feel all those great techniques. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. In the chat, Brian dropped in, what books have inspired you to write your own story? So not just the books that you read growing up that inspired you to be a writer, but what books have inspired you? I'm changing his question slightly, or adapting it. What books have inspired you to write your own story?
I would say they were mostly books that followed like Black girlhood, because they were all still very different. I still felt like, kind of to what we've been talking about, kind of to Brianna's point a little bit, I just think not many people get what it means to grow up in Chicago, and especially to grow up a girl. And so I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. It's set in Ohio, like I think in the 40s. And even The Color Purple, which is set in the South. I love hearing these stories about girlhood, but they still weren't my story. And so I think when I started writing, it would just be like an assignment, but then I would always hit the assignment with something I knew. At Columbia, you have to do you have to do this class called, it's fiction 2, and it's a structure class. And so you have to take the structure. We had to take the structure of Bartleby the Scrivener by Melville. And, yeah, and
I prefer not to. Did anybody say that when you got the assignment?
I know. But then I wrote about 4 girls who were jumping double dutch, and the girl who was the boss of her girl group. And this outsider who comes in, who was like Bartleby, who has a terrible, like, you know, demise. But I wrote about these Black girls in the project of jumping double dutch, and it became my novel. But every time I had an assignment, I was writing about these Black people doing things that we just do that just came natural to us. The Hot Water Cornbread story was an assignment. It was a how-to I had to write at Columbia. And I was like, I know how to make cornbread, so.
Yeah, and I love that. It becomes something completely different or deeper as you're reading it. And it just, Nancy had mentioned in the chat earlier that your verses and vignettes is lovely. And let me go back up to where it is. And I think we forwarded her email.
Yeah.
Toya's vignettes are hilarious, poignant, and funny, and it's true. So that influence, writing about Black girlhood. Are you writing for young adults, or are you writing for adults? Do you have that eye towards writing for young girls at all?
I'm going to make a bold statement that somebody's going to challenge right away. And I'm going to say that oftentimes writers don't think about these things. Like, they don't think about themes. They don't think about, like, I'm not out to sort of sway anybody. And I think originally I'm just writing what's like in my mind and what I know. And then later I'm like, oh, this person's going to think this about it. Or like, oh, look at these things.
Got it. Got it.
But like, I am never intentional about, because it's not like, you know, once upon a time in another life, I was a pastor. And when you are writing a sermon, you're thinking about who you're talking to, like to a T.
You think about your audience.
Yeah, but as a writer, like, I enjoy just like letting things come out. And then I sort of start to mold, and I start to notice the things that I put down without even thinking about it. But to answer your actual question, I would rather focus on telling the story the way it really is in my mind, and whoever it affects, that's great.
Yeah. So you are in service to the story and what it wants to be and what it needs to do. Do you ever feel, I asked this, I think I asked Todd this in a similar way during Todd Summers' Quarant Tour, but do you feel like your characters are telling you who they want to be, or how do you discover your characters, and how do you discover that story, and does it kind of unwind itself as opposed to, I'm going to write today about double dutch?
I think you know when things aren't working. So I'm not very bossy with my characters. Like, I try to see like what's working, like the people I trust who read my work. I have a character who kind of rose up and took over my book. I actually think she did. And I didn't like it at first because that wasn't my intention, but everybody loved this character, would not stop talking about her. And so I give her a little bit more real estate because it's working. And so I just think, I think they are.
She was probably, the character's like, over here, me. I want.
Yeah.
Like, once you finally listen to her, okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, you have to pay attention to that because I don't know. I don't believe in making characters like your slaves. If you've got characters who have like a really compelling voice and it's better than the characters you enjoy writing the most, you really have to just kind of go with that, because I've found that makes the best stories. Like, when you let you let them rise up and be who they want to be.
Be who they want to be and who they're telling you that they are. And I feel like a lot of people, that's a difficult thing to wrap your head around if you're not a writer, for sure, and if you are a writer, for sure. So we've got some things in the chat. Shifra says, great pastor. And then Maria, our librarian, I'm going to say that again. Pastors, attorneys, and writers often have storytelling in common. That is true. And then people honoring story honestly, and an eye on reality, but both hands on hope. XO. That's from Shifflet as well. And I hope I'm saying the name right. Okay, so these are your publications. I'm so happy to see Verses and Vignettes on here. Thank you, Shifflet.
I love this because the illustrations that go with the pieces of story, Landis did such a phenomenal job. And this is like the time of year when my family, we're busting out all the recipes that we don't touch all year because, you know, most of them are super unhealthy, even though they're delicious. But now's the time to let it all go.
It's the time. Holidays the time. So what is the one on the left? Which one is that?
Funny story. That is an article I wrote when I was supposed to be revising my novel. And writers will find any excuse not to write. And I just remember Audrey sent me an email and she said, hey, Monocle's like, they do these travel guides. And she's like, Monocle's doing Chicago. Like, they asked me to write something, but like, I don't really think I could write anything. Do you want to? And of course, looking for any excuse to like not write. I was like, I'll write this article. And then
procrastination writing
the whole time, because it's about like Chicago nightlife and our live theater and live music and all that. And so I finished the article, and then I had just finished a draft of the novel, and I didn't have an agent at the time. I had my little list of agents I wanted to like submit to, and I sent it off, and then I felt weird. I was like, this feels incomplete. Like, you need to send this to like another agent. So I asked my editors at this magazine if they knew any lit agents who were actively looking. And one of them said no. And the other said, I might know somebody. And she actually met an editor in England. So still not an agent. The editor wasn't taking submissions because she's like super busy and like, you know, swamped. And then she recommended someone who became my agent. So here's this article that was like a distraction from writing that led me to my current agent.
To your current agent. I love that story. I love that. And then, of course, Verses and Vignettes illustrated by Landis. And I can't wait for people to read the next two parts of the serial. And if you just now subscribe to the newsletter, unfortunately, you won't have the part 1 and part 2 of the story until we post it on the website after November is over. But I guarantee you will still enjoy it. I guarantee, even if you started with number 3, you will still enjoy it. Okay, so in the chat, hold on. Meredith says, I did not know that story, Toya. So grateful to that article. Is that your agent?
Yeah.
I love that.
She has no idea. Meredith, I had like submitted to these other agents who I had been studying for years because, you know, I can be a little obsessive, but then I just felt like something was off. I'm like, you've got to send this to one more person. So I think we were made for each other, Meredith.
Meant to be. Okay, and what are the other 2 pieces on here? You've got migration. Which journal is migration in?
So these last 2 are from the Chicago Reader. Remember back when the Reader used to publish fiction, and it was like a contest. And all of these great writers all over the city, we were so thirsty to get into the Reader. And so every time you would send it and you cross your fingers. And I got into the Reader 3 times between 2003 and 2015. And it was just like such a great, you know, celebration every time. And 2 of these, it's funny, Migration and Dual Citizenship were from 2 totally different books. And in grad school, my thesis advisor said, Toya, you're not gonna like this, but I think you should put these books together. And nobody ever wants to hear that. Like, writers have these, like, we have these lists, like, I'm gonna write this book and I'm gonna write that book. And he's just like, you don't know if you have that kind of chance. Like, you gotta put it all together. And so, sound advice.
Awesome. Okay. And so did you have any more slides? Oh, there you go. Landmarks.
And so then this book comes together. It's had a few different titles, but Landmarks is I'm convinced this is it. But it's interesting because the Robert Taylor homes, you know, they are these housing projects that were made out of the cheapest materials, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in this novel, I explore a lot of like architecture, and Chicago's known for all of our like beautiful buildings, but we don't always value the people in our city, especially if they're
Mm-hmm.
poor, especially if they're, you know, Black and brown. And so this is kind of a love letter to people who aren't loved so much, and who ought to be treated like historical landmarks, and who ought to see themselves as landmarks.
Okay, I love that. I actually missed didn't see this in the chat, but my mom, Ruth, hi mom, says all classical literature allows the reader to interpret based on his own history. You bring your own story and it expands to be a classic. I love that. Did you have any more slides, or are we?
That's it.
All right, rock and roll. So go ahead and stop your screen share. And I'm going back to just your face right there. So I want to thank you so much, Toya, for being here. It was so lovely to have you. And of course, hi again. Thank you so much for watching this week's Quarantour. We really appreciate your support. If you want to learn more about our guest from today, please read the description below. And if you'd like to support more programming like this, coming from Artist Bookhouse, please visit our website at artistbookhouse.org/donate. Thank you again for joining us.